Hello, I'm John Robertson, an amateur wildlife and landscape photographer. Welcome back to the channel for returning viewers. New viewers, please subscribe and take a look at the other content on the channel. Today I'm at Sargent Road Nature Park, soon to be open to the public. It's a piece of property that's owned and managed by Mud Creek Conservancy. So I'll be taking a walk shortly with the president of Mud Creek Conservancy, Ben Miller, who will give us an overview of the property, what they're doing to preserve it and maintain it, and give us some tips and tricks as well for us photographers to consider, and also a call to advocacy for all photographers to help protect our lands. Hello, welcome back. As I said, I'd be out with Ben Miller today, who's president of Mud Creek Conservancy. And I've hiked this a few times with Ben before. I guess I met you probably 2 years ago with one of your bird walks out here. And started getting involved more with conservation and the protection of our lands once I started working with Ben and the Mud Creek Conservancy. So if you could, Ben, why don't you introduce yourself? How you got involved in it?
Yeah, my name is Ben Miller, and I'm the president of Mud Creek Conservancy. And we are a 501c3 nonprofit land trust operating in the Mud Creek watershed. So we're a very hyper-local, I like to call us, land trust, whereas we do cover 3 counties. However, most of our priority preservation work is actually occurring right here in the northeast corner of Marion County in what we call the Mud Creek Valley. Kind of a unique geological area. There's some more topography than you would expect in central Indiana and Marion County on both sides of Mud Creek, as well as there's actually a rather intact forest corridor and pretty good quality that connects into Fort Harrison State Park, another over 1,500 acres of forest just on the other side of Fall Creek. And so Mud Creek flows south into Fall Creek and connects into Fort Harrison State Park. And so what we really have is an additional 1,500 plus acres of forest corridor that connects and makes this larger forested habitat complex. But the part we're working on is that 1,500 acres of forest that we call the Mud Creek Valley is largely unprotected, and we see it getting more and more developed each and every year. And so our organization, our mission is to work to chip away at preserving some of those larger undeveloped natural areas and trying to see if we can't keep that corridor intact for all the reasons that the benefits that forests provide, especially in an urban area. But we have this unique opportunity to actually keep a large forest complex in our capital city that attracts thousands of birds, hundreds of bird species that stop over on their migrations, species that like box turtles and flying squirrels that typically you would only associate with those large forests in Brown County in the southern Indiana forests. We actually have some of those remnant species hanging on probably by a thread, but we think if we can keep preserving and restoring this complex of forest, we can keep a little bit of that wilderness here in the city for us especially, but also for the wildlife.
And how big is the property here?
Yeah, so this property is kind of as a special one for us. It's 26 acres, which in the grand scheme of land trust work across the state, I would say that's really small. But when you look at really in Indianapolis, a 26-acre undeveloped lot is rather large. And so obviously it's been on our radar to protect for many years. We were founded in 1994, and this has been on our radar since then. It just was never a realistic opportunity. So back in 2019, Mud Creek Conservancy, who historically had only preserved land through donated conservation easements, working with landowners to put voluntary protections on their land that we would then oversee those protections into perpetuity. That was our role as a land trust. Very cost-effective way to preserve land in an urban area that has a very high development value. So I mentioned that this property is small in the context of land preservation and land trusts, but the price tag is right up there with those 100,000 acre parcels out in rural Indiana. And so because of that, oftentimes the urban nature preservation gets neglected because it's an uphill battle. But in an urban area, you've got a lot of people, and where you have a lot of people, you have a lot of people interested in seeing this nature preserved. And so we thought if we took a stab at it, we'd just see how many people we could get to kind of buy into the cause. And from 2019, when we signed a purchase agreement for the property that was for sale and slated for development, we raised over $500,000 and purchased the property to create what we were calling Sargent Road Nature Park. So that's the vision that we've created of what we would do with the property. So we're not just preserving it to fence it off and set it aside. Part of the vision was always to have it first and foremost preserved and restored for the wildlife, but also make sure there is a strong component for people to be able to get out, enjoy the investment, photography, nature hikes, education for youth and families. And so that's the part that we're working on right now. So we own the property as of 2021, and now we're continuing to fundraise and in the midst of permitting and engineering and hopefully construction here soon on the permanent nature trails and parking lot, and all the parts that'll help get access to the people. The wildlife's already here, but we're working on the kind of public access components right now.
And what are some of the biggest challenges with the property itself to get it to the state where you want it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, but I will say, for an undeveloped 26-acre property in the city, this is really, in the grand scheme of things, I looked at it as a ready-made nature park. It needs some love and care. When a property sits basically untouched, that was a double-edged sword. So on one hand, oftentimes these sites get prepped for development, makes it an easier sell. So somebody would come in, clear all the trees out, scrape it clean, say, look, we've already made the buildable plots for you. All you got to do is buy it and come in and build. So luckily the landowners didn't do that. I think they wanted to see it preserved. They just didn't know that there was a route to do that. And so when we pitched our vision, this site has basically grown up from agriculture. So it was heavy agriculture in Marion County up until the 70s, and I think we saw on aerial photos this actually had some tenant farming done all the way up into the 90s. So there's a lot of diversity on the site, which I really like. You can take we'll see on our hike. You can see several different ages of forests, meadows, wetlands, older growth forests, and that's because of kind of that human disturbance history. Is some of these were recently farmed, some were some corridors were left alone because it wasn't productive farming or it was too difficult, so we've got some older trees there. And so when you look at that diversity, you take a mile hike around and you kind of felt like you walked through a nature park. So we don't have to do a lot of planting, waiting 10 or 20 years to make it feel like a nature preserve. It was a nature preserve ready to be preserved, and we just kind of have to put some finishing touches on it. One of those things we'll probably talk about as we walk is invasive species. That's a common management concern or mismanagement responsibility when you inherit a property or purchase a property as a land trust, is you want to make it reach its full potential. So while it's a beautiful property now, with some elbow grease and some strategic planning, removing some of those invasive species, allowing some of those native species that we see kind of scattered throughout. Some areas are really nice, some areas are heavily infested, and you can kind of see those wildflowers poking their heads out, but oftentimes when they're being smothered out by no sunlight, chemically suppressed by these plants, they just need a chance to come back and flourish. And oftentimes removing those invasives, doing that and giving them some time, you don't really even need to plant things sometimes. You just need to clear out the invasives, let nature heal itself, which it's really good at doing. And so we've started that process. That'll be an ongoing.
Never ends.
Yeah, I get asked about volunteer opportunities. It's been a little limited right now as we are really focused on kind of the infrastructure and kind of the nuts and bolts of getting this thing open. But that kind of care, those volunteer opportunities are going to be here forever. Heavy lifting off the bat, and then just kind of routine maintenance as we go, and watching the land heal itself.
Awesome. And you're also a photographer.
Yeah, this is a Nikon P90X, so take that. That's the kind of photographer I am. I think that probably speaks for itself. I'm a amateur, opportunistic. I actually, when I got this, it was honestly more for kind of scientific purposes. I was always frustrated. I just never really was big into binoculars for whatever reason, because I think when you're an amateur birder, you can see whatever you want, but then trying to describe it to somebody, you don't know if you actually described the right bird or not. So I found that if I could get a picture of it, send it to my buddy who knew what he was looking for, that was a better way to actually get confirmation on what I was seeing out in nature. So I've really used it more as initially as a tool to say, hey, Wes Samoya, what's this bird on the top of this tree? Not an artistic photo.
It's more for the record shots.
More for the record shots, for my own, what was that? And then it kind of just grew into, I think I've kind of been trying to push the limits of, what a camera like this can do. And so it's been fun. As I've kind of documented much of what we have in the area, then I can kind of relax a little bit and take some time trying to get some photos I like, and it's been fun.
Yeah, you're underselling yourself. I've seen your photos, though I'm not sure why I'm trying to judge them. I'm no expert myself. I'm an amateur. You've got some good photos.
Appreciate it. Yeah, it's
I think one of the things that help you a lot is your connection with nature, and you know where they are.
Pretty much anyone who enjoys the outdoors, whether you're a photographer, a conservationist, a hunter, trapper, I think there's a skill set that is shared and an appreciation that's shared. And it's just the end product is different, right? So some people want to see the bird, some people want a photo, some people, within reason, want to take the bird home and eat it. But a lot of those, a turkey or a grouse or a bobwhite. I think it's interesting though. All those, those are all successful encounters because you have to anticipate the behavior of the animal. And so if you can put yourself in the right spot, know somewhat what to expect of where the animal is going to show up, and then how the animal is going to behave after you see it. That helps both to observe the animal, but also if you're trying to get that shot, especially for warblers this time of the year, you have to be one step ahead of where they're going to land next. And so that's another fun challenge of the photography aspect, is you really have to learn not just what the bird is, but how it's going to behave. We want the beautiful vistas. From the big picture looking out, if we can clear out the honeysuckle, get the wildflowers to come back, that provides that beautiful vista.
Yes.
And then you start shrinking in a little bit from a management perspective. Once you get the wildflowers, you get the native insects coming back to come to the wildflowers. That attracts the birds. That it's all interconnected. And so, whether you're a macro insect photographer who needs that small fine scale interaction to be there, or a landscape photographer who wants the large field of flowers, or anything in between, really. It's also the photography is also connected.
We don't have any mountains here to shoot.
No. Yeah, so it's I've had fun dabbling in some of the really fine scale stuff, the minute insects to the birds that are eating the insects, and then the landscape photography is something I haven't dabbled in too much, but I really appreciate the art.
That's
for sure.
a tough one. So how'd you get your start in this?
Yeah, so when I started with Mud Creek Conservancy, I was working full-time for the Department of Natural Resources, Division of Fish and Wildlife, for really working on land protection within that division, working on a project helping lead the Healthy Rivers Initiative. So it was the state's largest land preservation initiative. They're setting out to permanently protect over 70,000 acres. So large scale, and that was preserving riparian corridors around 3 major waterways in Indiana: the Wabash River, Sugar Creek, and the Muscatatuck River. And so it was an effort to kind of capitalize on large chunks of protected land that already existed in those corridors, like Turkey Run State Park, Wabashiki Fish and Wildlife Area. You got the Muscatatuck Refuge down there. You've got several different fish and wildlife areas. And so it was an effort to kind of connect the dots and create a more permanent corridor of protected forest. And so I really liked that concept. I took that job because I really liked that project and just land protection in general.
All right, we got a thrasher and a couple vireos out here. There's the thrasher again. So what's all this beautiful looking plant life, Ben?
Yeah, so this was a good example of There's plenty of examples of invasive species throughout the site, but there are certain areas that we're going to kind of target first, just more of what I would consider almost a monoculture of invasives, where we're going to get the most bang for our buck, freeing the native plants and trees up. So this, most of the actual kind of shrubbery you see through here, the structure is invasive Asian bush honeysuckle. And this is a very common and prevalent, but negatively impactful invasive throughout, especially the Mud Creek Valley, but really all of the Midwest and beyond. It's a common along roadsides. In this instance, it's kind of covering both sides of this little stream, and almost created this dense monoculture. The great thing out here is that I mentioned before, where I would have some concern, especially if we're coming out here in the springtime, removing, because it's almost all honeysuckle. If you're to remove that, you're basically leaving that void of habitat. Migratory birds don't necessarily care if the plant is invasive or not. They're here for oftentimes a short amount of time. They need a place to rest, a place to grab some bugs, so they can get plenty of benefit from the honeysuckle. That being said, it's doing way more harm than any good. And but in areas like this, what brings me a little bit of peace is knowing that you can actually see, these tall, straight trees in between here. We have a lot of other similar structured shrubs that are growing in between the honeysuckle, like gray dogwood, flowering dogwood. And so you can kind of take out big chunks and not be completely void of habitat, nesting habitat, but really freeing up the good stuff that's in there that's probably struggling to flourish. Some of this honeysuckle, it starts growing like a tree. This one's almost growing straight up, which is unusual, but it's even being outcompeted by its own species. So it's shot to the canopy here. And then, not too far away, you've got some good native tree species, growing in here. We've got some elms and sugar maples, more mature trees. But unfortunately, I say these areas are typically almost void of ground cover, but you can look at this and say, well, I can actually see a lot of green. The problem is that most of this green, is actually just young honeysuckle. And so it's very good at being friendly to its own kind, but not so much some of the other native species. But we do have stuff like, this is an Ohio buckeye sapling coming up. So there's really good signs of, like I said, that existing kind of seed bank. And so, what we'd probably see is if we free this area up 1-2 years later, it's going to look like a completely different area. It's going to look like you came in and did a $10,000-$20,000 native restoration when really we just freed it up. So it's going to be exciting to kind of see how these areas respond. I can already see across the stream here, there's some wild phlox blooming, and so when you see stuff like that you can kind of start to envision, okay, remove this honeysuckle and maybe instead of 2 or 3 sprigs of wildflowers, you've got a sea of wild phlox and spring ephemerals. So that's something we'll be excited to watch and keep working on. Oh, here's a good one. It's actually the first time I've documented this at the site. Now that the name is eluding me. It's a good native wildflower. That's a really good specimen of it. If I knew what it was. Oh, man.
What's your educational background?
I went to Purdue University for forestry and natural resources. Started my career actually with the DNR as a fisheries biologist, which was my specialty in school. And so was doing, fish management, fish research surveys on our waterways in Indiana, helping advise regulations and stocking and kind of the health of our fish populations in the state. Really awakened me to this broader effort that's going on, really across the country. Every state has a network of land trusts that work collaboratively across. In Indiana, we have a land trust that covers every single county. So it doesn't matter where you live. If you're interested in land preservation, you can get involved with your local land trust. Actually, I'm the vice president for the Indiana Land Protection Alliance, and that's an alliance of land trusts, so we work collaboratively together. And there's some great maps on the Indiana Land Protection Alliance website that kind of show who your land trust is, what counties they cover. Sometimes there's some shared counties.
And I'll post links.
Yeah, that'd be great.
In the video.
Yep. And so there's land trusts working across the state that, and one thing we're really working on with the Land Protection Alliance is we've been protecting land collaboratively together for a long time, but there's been, especially since COVID, this renewed importance that we need to make sure we're tooting our own horn when it comes to, we provide tons of recreational opportunities to photographers, to hikers, bird watchers, and oftentimes I think the land trust community, for rightfully so, was a little bit more protective of sharing even some of those public, quote unquote, public spots.
Right.
Because there are issues, and oftentimes those are sensitive sites. But I think land trusts have become a little bit more strategic on, how they manage some of those more public friendly sites, making sure we advertise those, make them hospitable, and really making sure that the greater, the average citizen knows what land trusts do and why they can, benefit from supporting them. So that's been a neat kind of change in strategy as far as marketing and making these spaces approachable to, avid outdoors people, but also, some of them making sure you have a site that's more approachable to someone who's just dabbling in nature. So there's some new maps we've created that show, kind of land trust marquee public sites that you can get to and have amenities. And so that's a great map to check out. Probably find yourself some new natural areas in your region that you didn't maybe appreciate before. Indigo bunting, top of that tree.
So I think most of the wildlife and landscape photographers are somewhat, let's say, at least aware of nature. Are there anything us photographers do that drive you crazy when we're out in places like this that you wish we didn't do?
I'll probably be able to answer that question better once this is open to the public and we have more time to observe how people, everyone's going to have a different way they interact with nature, and photographers will have their own quirks. Dog walkers have their quirks. Joggers. Nature is no different than the rest of the world. Everyone has different opinions and different kind of ways they go about doing their daily life. So. I think some of the things that when I follow some of our nature photography groups here in Indiana, something that I think they've become even better at is at least having some advocates for how to respect, distance for wildlife. If you're not getting those really up close shots of that bald eagle nest or that warbler, maybe that doesn't mean you need to try to find a way to get closer to the animal. Maybe that means you need to try to find a way to be more secretive or get a bigger lens. So there are ways that you can just kind of learn about what is the respectable distance, because it's kind of that with great power comes great responsibility. So it's great to learn the behaviors of animals, learn where they're going to nest, learn kind of know how to push their boundaries, their limits. But on the flip side of that, when you have that knowledge, you need to make sure you're using it to make sure you're not disturbing those animals. The better you get at being able to identify where they are or that they're there.
Yes.
The average dog walker or hiker may actually be less intrusive because they're going about their daily activities, not even knowing it's there. And so it's just, I think in general, photography is a very non-aggressive, non-intrusive hobby, but you can always do a little bit better. And I think there are some groups in Indiana specifically who challenge each other to do that. And you kind of constantly have to make yourself aware of it, because I've done it too. I think we'd all be lying if we say we haven't flushed a bird trying to get a better shot. Yep. Scared that blue heron down the creek, or tried to get a better shot. So it's something, it's a give and take like everything else. And so I think
you should approach every shot with that in mind, that you don't want to disturb.
Yeah, I think to me, you can have the shot in your mind, the best shot you could possibly get, but you can add a cherry on top of that and say, I got this shot, and this bird didn't even know I was there. I walked away, and it was still on the same branch. That's, something you can't be reflected in the photograph.
Right.
But when you tell the story,
right,
that's something that when you walked away. To me, I think the challenge of wildlife photography is you're capturing a wild moment.
Yes.
And so if you want to capture a slightly domestic moment, you can go photograph an owl in a zoo and get a great shot of it up close, macro. So a lot of it is, challenge yourself to capture a wild moment, not an orchestrated moment where you've kind of stuck yourself into the equation.
Yeah, there's just a continuum there.
For sure.
I think from photographers to nature.
Yeah, educate yourself. Before you go out and do something, do some research, ask your local, bird biologist. What do you think about this?
I did last week.
Yeah, so a lot of times those professionals, not only will they talk to you, they will be flabbergasted that you reached out and asked them an ethical birding photography question. So
yeah, good stuff. How about what are the good things? So if I put myself in the category,
I think there's way more positive. I think for nature photography, it was really one of the reasons I've always been more or less interested in photography. But one of the reasons I wanted to have my own camera that could take decent shots was I was trying to promote a fundraising project to preserve this site, and so I knew if I could be out here capturing what most people don't observe when they drive by on their car, if they take a hike, oftentimes we're doing guided tours, you're noisy, you may not see those warblers, those more secretive birds. And so there's a story to tell that photographers can really, a picture's worth 1,000 words is true when it comes to raising awareness for nature conservation, protection projects. And so we really, we made an effort to, if you're going to sell a $500,000 property, people need to know that, it's worth protecting. It's not just, an open space. It's not just helping out the neighbors who live adjacent to it.
Right.
And so we were able to, we partnered with Wes Amoya, a local bird biologist. I took my own photos. We partnered with some other local photographers. John, you yourself have donated some photography. And so we were able to kind of craft this greater story for the property itself and what it's home to, versus just saying it's great habitat, the birds love it, prove it a little bit, and then people really buy into it. But if you're out on a site and you take a great photo, there's going to maybe be a happy medium. You might not want to say, hey, I was on trail A, point B, here's my GIS location, here's where the owl nest is. That's a whole nother can of worms, right? But on the larger scale, if you take a great photo, landscape, bird, bee, wildflower, tag the land trust that provided that habitat and that opportunity. That helps them, again, raise awareness, raise funds, protect more land.
That's a good tip.
So don't pretend like you're out there discovering brand new places. Sending a message to those land trusts or saying, hey, you're welcome to use this photo, share it on your site. Oftentimes we want to do that. It just falls down on the list of things we have time to do. We see the photo, but don't quite have time to reach out and say, hey, can I share this? But it's okay to be pushy when you're offering free services. Say, hey, look at this. Share this with your followers. Most land trusts like to do that. So,
well, you've been very receptive to it. So, and so the other local organizations. So, I think that's the word for you guys out there: is get involved, reach out to these folks that are in your area that are protecting these lands that we want to get photos of, both the landscapes and the wildlife that's on them. Reach out to them and see if you can help with your photography skills.